What's it like when you can't move forward? When you're actually held down by a system or circumstance that halts your productivity and makes no rational sense? Every professional has experienced this at some point. And today we tackle this topic on the Smart Agency Presents the GlobeSt Women of Influence podcast series, where we dive into topics of interest for women leaders in commercial real estate. Now, first, I want to introduce today's wonderful co-host who has a very special announcement for this year's GlobeSt Women of Influence, which takes place in Denver on July 13th and 14th. Please join me in welcoming GlobeSt's Jenn Quader.
Hello, everyone. We are so excited to have you listening in on our podcast today. And I get the privilege of announcing our 2026 keynote. Her story has been featured on Netflix, Hulu, Lifetime, all the global news channels you can name. She is known by just about everyone and has really become a symbol for advocacy, for self-advocacy, for resilience, and for rebuilding your life. Our keynote for GlobeSt Women of Influence 2026 is Amanda Knox. We are so pleased to have you on the show today. Welcome, Amanda.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned all of the various news organizations that I've been a subject of, because I have this joke how I never really got to go and do the dating scene because of all of the insanity that was going on with me. However, I have been very curious about the dating apps, and my favorite one is LinkedIn.
Yeah. It's a good dating app.
It's a great dating app because you get a little bit of the vibe of the person. And I was like, but what would even my dating, what would my profile be on LinkedIn? I guess contributor to international media organizations. What would it even be?
Star of all things legal drama.
Yeah.
Survivor alum.
Is that like a LinkedIn thing that you can say though? Is that anyway?
We're gonna make it a thing.
I actually, a friend of mine said that she is looking for a boyfriend in her tax bracket, and I think LinkedIn could help you find that. So it's really good for your own branding and for the target audience you're seeking.
Yeah, and it also goes with the sweetheart. Have you guys noticed the sweethearts have changed what they write on the little hearts now?
Yes.
I'm giving them to my daughter, and she always wants to know what they say. I have a 4-year-old daughter, for the record, and she wants sweethearts. It was Valentine's Day shortly ago, and one of them said joint taxes. And she was like, "Mommy, what does joint taxes mean?"
Yeah,
and I was like, "Whatever happened to just kiss me?"
That's a little
very
much,
intense.
guys.
Yeah, and I've got a little 4-year-old too, and he's just like, "I just want the ones that say eat me."
See, an Alice in Wonderland fan.
Right, exactly.
Well, and then jumping from 4 years old to about the 25-year-olds where they all say that eats. Guys, that eats. Yeah, that totally eats, guys. Have you heard
gonna
this,
get some
Amanda?
some Gen Z lingo?
Oh, that's some Gen
education
Z
today.
right there. That's some Gen Z, guys. That eats, guys. That
Eats,
totally
man.
eats.
And that's bad, right?
And that, actually, it's good. It's good. And if you, I think that eats is that's hot. That eats.
Oh, so it's that eats.
That eats, that panda on your shirt. That eats. You know what I mean? That's cool. That eats. Yeah, you clocked it.
Okay.
And then they do this. They clocked it. Clocked it.
Oh, that's
from Real
what
Housewives.
this is.
That's what this is.
I thought it was a tiny little hand clapping.
Oh,
that's what I.
It is a tiny little
baby hand.
You know how the tiny little violin
little
that when you're
violin.
sad. I was just like, oh, I thought this was tiny little applause.
Yeah,
No, I'm very removed.
You know what? When you're in the world of the 4-year-old, that's all you can do. And then when you're in the world of the world we're in, which is working in commercial real estate, you're working across, we have a lot of the Gen Z, and then we have a lot of every single generation. And so you're really looking at how those, how the verbiage, how the mindset kind of comes together. And I think that's a really good way to jump into some questions for you, Amanda, because we have this great event coming up July 13th and 14th in Denver. And it's going to bring together, I'm going to say primarily women, but it's women and men. It's people who are interested in the advancement of women in commercial real estate. And you, Amanda, everyone knows you certainly.
I'm clearly an expert in all of that.
Of course. Well, you yourself have done so many sales. Yes, you're obviously
a real estate mogul.
Yeah.
You can talk a little bit about institutional grade cap. What's going on in cap rates and
Yeah.
But you know what you are is you are someone who has been in the limelight in a way that you didn't ask for it, and in a way that lasted for a long time in your life and really touched every part of your life. And this is what a career does. A career touches every part of your life. And so as you stand up there on stage, there are these women who are trying to, I'm going to say, live in, break through whatever glass ceiling exists in this $5 trillion industry. Across our C-suite, like less than 10% is still women. It's just not a women-dominated industry yet. And so the question becomes, from your perspective as someone who really, a lot of your work is about having your voice heard. You were not listened to. You were not understood. And so I want to maybe start with a little teaser, Amanda, if you could talk a little bit about how are these women in this $5 trillion industry, what are they going to hear from you about how they can better contribute and have their voice heard within this industry and this world?
Great. That's a really great a starting point for this conversation, because it's true. I think the first thing is acknowledging that when you are a minority voice in the room, it means that people are not going to automatically assume that you haven't the authority to have your voice heard. And there's not going to be that subconscious acceptance of what you might be saying. Just because you don't look or you are not coming from the same place as the other people that are going to be in the C-suite with you, there is something like unconscious. And again, this is not even like a conscious thing. People automatically just accept things that are coming from people that they can relate to. And they are more skeptical of things that they hear from people that they don't automatically relate to. And something that I have really discovered in the course of not just like surviving the whole, wow, this crazy story is happening around me, but also directly confronting it and directly confronting the authors of that narrative. I went back to Italy and confronted my prosecutor and having that, like, entering into a conversation that was actually not just like, maybe there's skepticism. There was, an antagonistic conversation. There was all of the groundwork for it being hostile, for having the people in front of me not believing anything that I said. One of the things that I have found is that it's really important to remember that everyone has their own reality in their own head. And if you are operating from the place that the reality that is in your head is obvious to the person that is sitting across from you, there is going to be misconceptions. Like this is actually a proven psychological truth when it comes to wrongful convictions in general. A lot of innocent people walk into police stations and into interrogation rooms assuming that their innocence is obvious to everyone around them, when in fact the investigators have this other reality that they're creating in their head based upon their unconscious biases and what information they heard first, and there's so much that informs the way that we interpret reality. And so it's not enough just to assert facts. Facts must be interpreted, and they're interpreted based upon the stories that we have living inside of us, that we're telling ourselves, that we're motivated to tell. And so when I was confronting my prosecutor, for example, and really, exploring the question for myself, why did he do the things that he did to me? I first of all understood that if I was going to approach with an antagonistic attitude or even a defensive attitude, it was not going to lead to a constructive conversation. And instead, I tried to do the exact opposite, which was try to imagine what I had in common with this person who had basically nothing in common with me. This like man from another generation and another culture who spent his entire life prosecuting cases and had made a stake in the world prosecuting me. Like his professional and personal stakes were that I had to be guilty for him to be a good person. How do I find something in common with this person? And the way that I approached that was by recognizing that because the case itself was so big and global and international in terms of the audience of it, it was very likely that he felt misunderstood or misrepresented along the way. And because I was making the argument that I was misunderstood and I was misrepresented, I tried to find that common thread. And I tried to say, hey, I don't really know you, and you don't really know me because of how this story of the case unfolded. Can we approach each other outside of the criminal justice system, outside of the media, and engage with each other as real people who have this thing in common, being misunderstood? And then allowing the conversation to unfold from there, really establishing that sense of commonality. And then that once that commonality comes into play, that sort of engenders a feeling of trust, of mutual respect and trust that allows you to introduce more challenging and conflicting arguments and to have those conversations from a more grounded and emotionally stable place. Because people are, like, if there's one thing that I've learned from this experience, it is that all human beings are highly emotional, especially men. and like anyone, like, it's so funny to me how especially men like to say that they're utterly rational, but they're like the logic and the rationality that they use is often grounded upon a feeling that they have. They have a
Right.
strong feeling, and then they like use their logic and, analysis to make sense of that feeling that they have instead of having the logic and the analysis and the rationality be instructive of their feelings. So
I hope it's okay to go this specific, but like, of
Yeah.
course, I watched the documentary on Netflix. One place where I really felt like I saw that was as the prosecutor is saying, well, this victim was covered with a blanket, and a man would never do that. Only a woman would do that. And I thought,
Yes.
what an interesting, just thing to create in your head, right?
Mhm.
And this is, man, this is so fascinating because one of the things that I have been doing more recently. And again, I've been talking with my prosecutor, conversing with him for years now. So we have this like level of trust, this level of built-in communication. And so I can posit things to him now with a kind of assertiveness that I wasn't able to posit at the very beginning of our correspondence. And one of those things that I posit to him is that there is a difference between a fact and an opinion. So, what is a fact and what is an opinion? So a fact is that after my roommate was brutally raped and stabbed to death, horrifically, whoever did this to her covered her with a blanket. Okay, that is a fact. Her body was covered with a blanket. Is it a fact that only a woman would cover a body with a blanket? No, that is not a fact.
That is an opinion.
That is not a fact. So like how, and we have the same thing. So one of the other things that my prosecutor argues is he says that the break-in, so our house was broken into, the person who did this crime broke into our house. And he says that the break-in was staged. He says that no real burglar would have entered the house the way that the burglar actually entered this house. And he says that, based upon, well, he chose a window that was high off the ground as opposed to a window that was closer to the ground. And I'm like, well, so again, a fact is a window is broken and someone who does not have access to the house got access to the house. Is it a fact that a burglar would only have chosen that other window, or is that an opinion? Like, again, like trying to sort of untease these things apart, because again, like everyone has their own reality in their mind, and it's really, really tempting to confuse your automatic sort of gut opinion about a thing as a fact. And because it's sort of informed by a fact, it feels like a fact to you, but it's not actually a fact. That is a way that you are choosing to interpret facts in order to construct a meta layer of reality on top of it.
Well, I just think it just relates so much to adversarial negotiations, and so much of the negotiations in commercial real estate are adversarial. And you think when you go into a contract agreement that you are seeing it the same way. And you might even have information about a property that you know to be true, but they're going to sit across from you and pretend like it's not true.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's insane to me, because I think, what really gets transactions across the finish line time and time again is really good relationships. Even in a really tough market, even in a really volatile market, the only thing that actually gets them over the finish line is that, well, I've just been doing business with this guy for so long, I trust him. And the fact that you were able to, in an adversarial situation, find a common thread with someone who, like, frankly,
I mean, well, and that's the great difficulty of life. Like, I
Right.
love that you're bringing up the adversarial negotiating, because it is true. Like, I've not negotiated in an adversarial way that way. I've been in the situation of a criminal justice related standpoint, which is highly adversarial. And you're right. Like, people, and this is a true fact about psychology. A true fact. All facts are true. That's the definition of a fact.
It's a really true one.
This is a super true fact about human psychology, and it's called, it's a kind of cognitive bias. It's confirmation bias. You're always very attuned to the facts that confirm your own narrative, and you're unconsciously and consciously disattuned to the facts that contradict your reality. And so, and it feels like gaslighting. It feels like a person is coming to you and you're saying, this is a fact, and they're going, no, it's not. And you're just like, why can't we just have a discussion? Like, why can't we just agree on what is real? Like, why is that? And it's typically, I have found, it's because there is some kind of psychological validation that is trying to be communicated by what facts you agree are true versus not. I mean, and you see this in conspiracy theories as well, where people are seeking some kind of psychological validation by interpreting facts in a certain way and just choosing not to believe other facts because you don't want them to be true. And that's a real struggle, because ultimately, if you are in a situation where you have no choice but to be communicating and negotiating with this person, it'd be nice if we could all just walk away from every scenario where nobody wants to agree on what reality is. But I think we are all increasingly becoming aware that for all of us to function as a society in marketplaces, in legal settings, but also just in society in general, we need to be able to communicate about what facts constitute reality. And so much of that is complicated because people don't have the ability to assess all of the facts for themselves. They do have to rely on a certain point on relationships, on what experts we trust. How long have I been in communication with this person? Have they shown themselves to be honest and trustworthy versus prone to twisting things around for someone else's benefit? Like, that is a real issue, and it's one of the reasons why now as an adult, everything happened to me when I was 20 years old, and I grew up really in this scenario. I've realized that it's the importance of being honest with others, but especially honest with yourself, is like one of the fundamental tools for society even to function.
Well, and I love what you brought up, which is attitude as you approach this, because each one of us struggles, and everyone struggles with confirmation bias. You hear it across selecting talent. You hear it in any sort of deal-making scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what you're talking about is kind of, again, when I'm thinking about this crowd of people who are listening and learning, what they want to know is, how do I become a better negotiator? How do I close that deal? And not only that, how do I become the person who, as Jenna said earlier, our industry is about relationships. It is about knowing someone for a long time and gaining that trust. How can I be that person? And I think you brought in something really interesting, Amanda, when talking about revisiting your prosecutor, which was going with the attitude of, where do we overlap instead of where do we fight, instead of where are we off on price, where are we off on whatever those terms may be, where do we overlap, and then bringing that in. Now, I want to ask, because it strikes me that as you were reopening this conversation with your prosecutor, and help me if I may be wrong on this, but I believe it was after all the judgment, and it kind of went back and forth. And my question is, I want to talk about the stakes being really high, because prior to that judgment, the stakes were your whole life. I mean, your whole life had already been halted by something. And as you said, you were quite young when this happened. But now we're in this position where every conversation you're having, again, in what is an adversarial negotiation, no doubt, is really high stakes. And as I relate that to the women in the audience at GlobeSt Women of Influence, which again is July 13 and 14 in Denver, as I relate that to that audience, I think about them and I think that they are walking in sometimes to these adversarial negotiations, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars and many thousands of people whose lives are on the line, because these are portfolios of property. So what would your advice be if you're walking into one of these negotiations with those really high stakes? And let's say prior to judgment being passed, how do you approach that? What would you counsel women to think about in those situations?
Yeah, and this, I think that the best thing that I can think of, first of all, you have to be your best self in those scenarios, right? You know that if you have that much at stake, you have to appear as your best self. And how do you get into a mindset of being your best self when you're entering into an adversarial scenario that sort of puts you in a weird mental position because you're a little bit defensive, you're a little bit ready to fight and claw your way for what you know should be yours, right? Those stakes can almost counteract all of the things that you need to do in order to arrive at the table with the sense of confidence and calm to address the situation. And yes, I absolutely know that feeling because, going back to Italy to confront my prosecutor, it was super high stakes for me. One, I didn't even know if he was going to rearrest me on a false charge. So there's a million reasons why everyone in my life was like, this is a really bad idea. What do you even get out of this? There was they didn't really quite understand. But I think the fear for me was that entering into that conversation, I knew that there were two parts of myself. The one part of myself that was open and curious and exploring, really open to this person and open to the possibility that maybe this is not a zero-sum game. Maybe there's a way that his needs and my needs can both be met and addressed so that we don't have to confront this same scenario in the adversarial way that we always have. That's one thing that I always try to think about is how can I win and you win? How can I cultivate an environment where I am presenting to you an opportunity to win in a new way that you hadn't considered before? So those are things that I had in my mind. That was the one part of myself. But then there was the other part of myself that was hurt and wounded and scared and justifiably so. And I was afraid that version of me would win the day, because I was afraid of what he might say to me. He might gaslight me again. He might lie to my face. He might say something utterly offensive, and it might trigger all of those feelings of hurt and pain. Or in a case like you're talking about, somebody might make certain assertions that are not factual, are someone just gaslighting your face, and you're trying to have a good faith conversation, and you get the vibe that they're not having a good faith conversation with you, which feels wrong, and then you're getting off on the wrong foot. So how do you regain that sense of composure and find that place? And one of the things that I have found to be really helpful, and it's sort of counterintuitive, is to let go of the way you think everything should be or should go. I think we all approach circumstances in our lives with an idea of how we think they should go, right? And we get upset when they don't go that way, right? And I have found that is a very limiting mindset because it doesn't allow you in the moment to explore possibilities that you didn't imagine prior to that scenario. And it makes you honestly a less effective adapter to the circumstances. In a negotiation, the most powerful thing that you can be is adaptable. You can prepare all you want for the adversarial scenario, and as a military friend of mine says, all the greatest plans are just a list of things that are not going to happen. So like, like I have a friend in military who's like, the military lives by, making plans and very strict, this is how we're going to do things. And then, of course, everything falls apart and you have to adapt. So be adaptable. Being adaptable means that you have the ability to recognize, again, how potentially there is not a zero-sum game being played, how you can find wins while also making compromises that don't take away from the thing that you are gaining. There's one thing that I found really helpful in all of my work has actually been reading something called nonviolent communication. Are you guys familiar with that?
I am.
Okay.
You are?
But tell me more. I am, but tell me more.
Yeah. So nonviolent communication is a system of debate and discourse that argues that in a debate, no one should ever leave feeling like they lost something. In all circumstances, everyone is ultimately attempting to satisfy a certain set of universal needs. And then, of course, when we have these universal needs, we have all these strategies for satisfying those needs. And those strategies might put us in conflict with each other. But it's not actually the needs themselves that are in conflict. It is the strategies for which we try to fulfill them. So we can introduce new ideas to our opponents for how they can strategically have their own needs met that don't come into conflict with ours. And again, this sounds like crazy to think of when in a scenario where like his reality is you're guilty of a horrific crime and you deserve to be in prison. And I'm like, I'm not guilty of a horrific crime. And actually you should not have your job because you're bad at it. Like that, there's nothing like more like directly confrontational than that. And yet, like in that scenario, I presented him with an alternate reality for him to consider that he hadn't considered before, which was that you can be wrong about a fact, and that does not make you a bad person. I think one of the reasons why he was holding on so tightly to his convictions around this case, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, was that he was afraid that being wrong about me meant that he was a bad person. And I really tried to alleviate that fear of his by telling him, like, look, everybody makes mistakes. Like everyone. I do, everyone. There are facts, and then there are interpretations of those facts. How we interpret facts are not totally up to us. Like a lot of it is unconscious. And so I do not think of you, my prosecutor, as a bad person. I think you made a mistake. But that doesn't mean that your story ends there. Your story could be starting right now, where you recognize the mistake and then you make changes to the world that introduce you as a hero to a new story instead of the villain of my story. Like really sort of encouraging how is his universal need and my universal need of being recognized for who we really are and a sense of belonging to the world. Like, how can we both satisfy those needs when in the past we have been pigeonholed as adversaries and in direct opposition? So, in a contract negotiation setting, there is more of a like, I get this much money, that means you pay this much money. Like there is a direct like loss benefit. But I think we all recognize that there's more to contracts and there's more to agreements than just the money that's being exchanged. There is value. You're ultimately discussing value and how can the value that you want to obtain and the value that they want to obtain, how can everyone come out of this scenario feeling like they won?
This is so poignant to me because we go into a negotiation with a strategy and you can't help it. Like you genuinely believe that the only way you're going to get this over the finish line is your strategy. And like, if anything else happens, it's not going to work. And I cannot tell you how much that has failed me time and time and time again. And the more that I've learned that it's okay to listen to someone else's strategy, even if it's like wildly, like sometimes it's so offensive because it's like, you don't think I add value to this? Like you're asking me to like discount this and like you know what I mean? Like you don't think I'm worth it. But it's true. It's just a different strategy. And sometimes when I've thought about it and repositioned it in my mind, it's like, I actually might get more on the back end if I go with this route.
Right.
That I think that's the power, right? Like Amanda, you were saying you're looking at the win-win, and the power is the win-win is that's where you get the most is when both parties can find that. And I agree. I'd restate for our listeners of the podcast, in a negotiation, the most powerful thing you can be is adaptable, because I just think that that's magical. What I do want to say though is you mentioned nonviolent communication, and you spoke to it from the perspective of coming in and looking at the win-win. Some of the research I've done on nonviolent communication, from my perspective, has been in the loving kindness realm, and so it would be for the self nonviolent communication. And I find this a very interesting. Again, we're talking psychology, and I like the way that it goes over because, as Jenna talks about, what happens when you're in that moment and you come in with your outcome, the outcome you want, the strategy you want, you're holding to that, and when you see something different, what you begin to do, or in my experience, is doubt yourself. And there begins some inner violent communication. Am I stupid? Am I an idiot? Did I screw this up? And so if you can really get out of that pattern of nonviolent communication within yourself, that then clears the way for you to be able to open it up to others. I find that really interesting.
Yeah. So say someone brings in a strategy to you that is completely different than what you were, that contradicts your strategy utterly. There are two ways to respond. Either you can view that strategy as a threat to you that you must deny because it is not your strategy, or you can start to self-doubt and you start to unravel internally. And like neither of those have to be the case because they're just different ways of interpreting reality. And another person's interpretation of reality is interesting material to consider. It may not be valid, right? Like my prosecutor's interpretation of reality was not valid. However, his feelings were. His feelings were valid. And so I tried to validate his feelings while challenging his interpretation of reality. And again, that requires you to be open to what information people are bringing to you, what strategies they're bringing to you, because there is a truth and a validity to what is behind that strategy. And that's something that I always try to think about, like, what is this person ultimately trying to accomplish with this strategy? And maybe the thing that they're trying to accomplish, they think is going to be effectively produced from their strategy, but maybe I can imagine an even better strategy that would help them to achieve the thing that they're trying to achieve while also helping myself achieve the thing that I'm trying to achieve. It's not necessarily a threat to what you have to gain, what somebody else is trying to gain. Like that's where I'm trying to like.
In fact, it can enrich it. Sorry. I mean, it's not even a threat. It's the opposite thereof. It's actually layer upon layer. You can learn to understand each other more deeply. And again, I'm fascinated and hope that perhaps in Denver in July, we can talk a little more about what this long relationship you've created with your prosecutor. That's resilience in and of itself, that you are learning and gaining from that type of ability to understand what happened and to understand, where you're going forward. I'm going to have to lead us back to our narrative just to get to the end. But I mean, I could talk to you all day, Amanda, to be honest.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, we're talking some deep stuff.
But I love it because I look forward to meeting you in person. I want to ask, as we're talking about the, what I'm going to call letting go of outcomes, and that's because there's a meditation I do called letting go of outcomes, but it's very much what you're talking about, which is, let go.
Inspired, Jen.
What?
How original.
Like, try to let it go. So one of the things, and I'll kind of restate, the people in our audience are like brokers and owners of property and capital providers and lenders. And these are all these different people. And one of the things actually my firm helps them do is control their narrative. So there's a big thing about controlling the corporate narrative. And again, we've talked about the importance of relationships. And so it's very important that people can do their due diligence, look you up and understand you. So from your perspective, Amanda, especially through the lens of, hey, in an adversarial negotiation, you've got to be adaptable. You've got to be open. You got to let go of outcomes. However, there is this whole thing of controlling the narrative, and certainly the narratives can sometimes fly around you. I'll go back to one of your great strengths and one of the things I really think you will bring on that stage as our keynote in July, and that is just the self strength that you have, the confidence you've brought, within yourself. And I want to ask, in the face of narrative challenges and of changing narratives, how would you advise that women within their career who are doing this high stakes work, how did they stay authentic and true to themselves? What are some of the things you do?
That's a great question. So yes, you're right. And that challenge for me was there was no I was very immediately confronted with this problem because I went from being an anonymous college student to one of the most vilified and hated women on the planet, a monster, the Foxy Noxy, the Luciferina. Like, there was a narrative about me that had taken over my reality and literally imprisoned me. It capped my human potential. It impacted the way that I was able to interact with other human beings on both a physical and an emotional and psychological way. Even after I came home and I was no longer imprisoned, I was still stigmatized by the narrative. And I felt for a long time like I just wanted my life back. I wanted to be the anonymous college student that I really was before this whole terrible thing happened to me. And one of the things that really helped me was, first of all, recognizing that anonymous college student didn't exist anymore. It didn't. Like, as much as I would have loved to have gone back to being the 20-year-old kid who just liked to read poetry and wanted to be a translator, like that wasn't my life anymore. That wasn't who I was, and it wasn't how the world perceived me to be. It wasn't how the world perceived me to be because of the narrative, but also like it was important for me to recognize that I too was informed by this experience that had happened to me. I was no longer just, a Harry Potter nerd who liked to read poetry. I was now like deeply invested in narrative and how narratives are constructed and how adversarial systems work and how that leads to the sort of dismantling of truth as opposed to the like collective sort of agreement of truth. And so that really got me down this rabbit hole of thinking like, how do we all function? How do our brains work? How does society work? How do I have a decent conversation with somebody who thinks that I'm a bad person? Like, how do you do that? It felt like a trap for a long time. It felt like I was trapped in this story until I was able to reverse it and think, oh, maybe I'm actually informed by this story. Maybe I'm propelled by it even. Maybe now my life has direction that I'd never considered for myself before, but like here I am. This is my PhD at the School of Hard Knocks, that I'm now like a weird expert of like certain systems and ways of thinking, and I can share that in a way that adds value to other people's lives. That is a new narrative that I was only able to arrive at once I relinquished and properly grieved the narrative that I had always hoped for myself, the life that I had always hoped for myself. And that continues to evolve to this day. Like, one of the things that I'm thinking about now, after having spent years sort of like going back to Italy and confronting my prosecutor and defending myself in courts of law, is I'm now imagining a new question for myself, which is, what is it like to have direction without an opponent? Which is a really interesting new direction for me. But it does feel a little unfamiliar because I'm like, but I don't have like, where's the bad guy? Where's the bad guy I'm fighting? I have to fight a bad guy. Like, what's going on here? It's like,
I can't just be driven by good things. What?
Right.
What? And what is fascinating to me, what I see in that, and I'll say Dr. Knox, since I think you get a PhD in hard knocks.
Thank you very much,
Dr. Knox.
But
PhD in hard knocks.
Yeah,
that's right. What I think I hear you saying is that by facing the fear, by walking up to what you are afraid of and walking through it, thereby you can find the joy. The joy and the delight happens once you get through the fear. And if I put myself in those shoes, a very, very young woman, a college student, falsely accused, put into prison, all of these things, I may want to hide after. I may feel that desire. And it strikes me that yet again, you're doing the antithesis of that, which is you're standing up and you're speaking and you're sharing that story so I just applaud that. I think I want to ask Amanda, just any last words. What we're hoping is people are going to hear this and sign up and join us, because we know that there's so much that they're going to learn at this Women of Influence conference, and specifically from you. Is there anything in your current work or in that non-opponent driven work that you're doing that you want to leave with us?
Yeah, no, I think that, first of all, thank you for this conversation, because I don't often get to talk about like the little nitty gritty of like human psychology. Typically people are just asking me, oh my God, what happened? And then what happened? Oh my God. So like, that's great. I love that. And I look forward to that kind of depth that we will get to explore at the conference. And in particular, that question of positioning yourself as the author of your own narrative, instead of finding yourself the helpless, plot character in someone else's narrative, really figuring out a way to own what you have done, and also what has happened to you that is not in your control, in a way that feels like fuel instead of feels like a burden, and finding ways of making connections that were seemingly impossible if you just were to say from the outset, oh, could you make a connection and a relationship with this person, or like negotiate a contract with that person, and you're like, no way in hell. In a world that doesn't really encourage confrontation, I have found that there is a surprising amount of agreement that people can come to if they are willing to remain curious and courageous in the face of difficulty. And so we'll discuss that in depth.
I love it. A round of applause for Dr. Knox, Dr. Amanda Knox. Amanda Knox. Truly, we are so honored and so very grateful, and we thank you. For everyone who is listening, please, please, please get your tickets now. There will never be a better price than there is today. So please get your tickets now. There's a discount code included. This year's event is in Denver on July 13th and 14th. GlobeSt Women of Influence is the singular national networking, professional development, and team building event in commercial real estate. Companies from all over the world send representatives to this 2-day event to gain deeper insights, make valuable connections, and cultivate new ideas that bring innovation, growth, and deal flow. We can't wait to see you there. Bye, guys.
Bye. See you guys in Denver.